Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mighty Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of the final volume of Thousand Autumns, also known as Shen Qiao by Meng Xi Shi. We'll be covering chapters 115 to 118. I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 115, Sect News. The newcomer was Yuan Ying. After Shen Qiao had fallen from the cliff, everyone on Shendu Mountain had been unable to help their panic, despite Yu Ai's best efforts to suppress it. Yuan Ying ranked 4th among Tifengge's disciples, and neither his temperament nor his martial arts were particularly outstanding. He'd always remained a rather obscure character within the sect. After taking over Shendu's Violet Palace, Yu Ai felt that a Shidi of his, being the most timid of their lot, would be unable to make any waves. Hence, he never paid much attention to Yuan Ying. Neither Yu Ai's collaboration with the Gokturks nor his accepting the title of Yu Yang's Bishop of Great Peace and Perfected Master were secrets. At that time, the Gokturk Khaganate had been incredibly powerful. Both Zhou and Qi were forced to acquiesce to them. Yu Ai had seen the Gokturks' ambition and wanted to use their power to restore Shendu Mountain to its former glory, so both parties remained in close communication. Duen Wenyang had even invited Yu Ai to the group ambush on Yanbushi outside the royal capital of Tuyuhun. The ambush had little overlap with Shendu Mountain's interests, but Yu Ai had still intervened to help. However, the Gokturks' plans for Shendu Mountain didn't stop there. Shendu Mountain had a long legacy, possessing extraordinary influence within the Jianghu and even in Taoism itself. If they could turn Shendu Mountain sect into their puppet, they would not only grasp a crucial bit of power within the Central Plains Taoist discipline, but they'd get their hands on the hundreds of years' worth of wealth and martial arts classics Shendu Mountain possessed as well. Shendu Mountain had lost Tifengge and spent many years since with their mountain gates sealed, thus gradually falling into decline. Shen Qiao was already gone, and their members' hearts were scattered. There wouldn't be a second Tifengge, so in the eyes of the Gokturks, it'd been the perfect time for them to infiltrate the sect. Duen Wenyang had trained under Hulugu, but due to his mixed heritage, his status among the Gokturks was far inferior to his Shidi Kunyes. He urgently needed some major contribution to improve his standing, and coincidentally, he hit it off with the Eastern Khaganate's Ishbara Khagan, who wished to be independent. Unfortunately, the situation didn't develop as they hoped. Though Yu Ai had accepted the title of Yu Yang's Bishop of Great Peace and Perfected Master, he refused to let the Gokturk people interfere in the sect's administration, and he also refused to let Ishbara Khagan station his people on Shendu Mountain. Thus, the cooperation between the two sides remained superficial, with no possibility of growing deeper. The Gokturks were naturally displeased. Shendu Mountain was like a large, rich chunk of meat right before them, and they couldn't eat it. Yuan Ying didn't know much about these things. It was only after he'd left Shendu Mountain to head to Qincheng Mountain that he met Yu Shengyan, who was returning from the sword trial conference. Yu Shengyan had then told him about these matters one by one. Up until then, Yuan Ying had felt the atmosphere within his sect growing increasingly dismal. He sought out his third Shixiong, Yu Ai, several times, proposing that they should find their second Shixiong, Shen Qiao, and bring him back to the sect, so that he could revitalize it. Yu Ai placated Yuan Ying gently a couple of times, then entrusted him with teaching young disciples. With Yu Ai having put his trust in him, Yuan Ying could only set this matter aside for the time being. But who'd expect that troubles would arise out of nowhere? Their Shirmei, Gu Hengbo, left the mountain without permission, without so much as a farewell. Yu Ai flew into a rage. He was furious. However, Yuan Ying was shocked speechless by what Gu Hengbo had written in her farewell letter to him. Afterward, he began paying more attention to Yu Ai, looking for a chance to secretly investigate. It was then that the elder in Shendu Mountain privately approached Yuan Ying, expressing his willingness to support him and have him replace Yu Ai. The more Yuan Ying thought about it, the stranger things seemed. He pondered the letter Gu Hengbo had left him some more, then quietly found his opportunity to leave Shendu Mountain. Yuan Ying had rarely left home since childhood. Life on the mountain was monotonous, but he'd always been able to endure the loneliness. He spent his days either training or reading, and he lacked even a shred of a youth's characteristic liveliness or cleverness. Even Gu Hongbo, who was around the same age as he was, couldn't bear it, and instead became closer to Shen Qiao. He originally came from a wealthy family, but he had a childhood speech impediment, and as the family itself had many children, his parents never favored him. Even the household servants would pick and choose whom to serve, and thus they followed his parents in snubbing this young master. Once, when Yuan Ying was taken out of the house, the servant's negligence resulted in him getting lost. Only then did he meet Qi Fengge, who brought him back to the Yuan family and returned him to his parents. His mother and father saw that Qi Fengge was a Taoist who knew martial arts, so they took the opportunity to ask Qi Fengge to accept Yuan Ying as his disciple. Qi Fengge saw that Yuan Ying possessed a fair amount of aptitude, so he agreed. In the last few years, Yuan Ying had visited his family only once, never mind leaving the mountain for training. His slightly dreary personality made him one of the least conspicuous presences on Xuandu Mountain. Nobody even realized that he'd quietly left Xuandu Mountain until a few days later. After leaving the mountain, Yuan Ying had no experience of the world to fall back on and no idea where to go. He wanted to find Shen Qiao, but didn't know where he was. When he heard that Qincheng Mountain was holding the sword trial conference, he thought that Shen Qiao might attend. He made inquiries all the way to Qincheng Mountain, yet ended up intermittently hungry because he hadn't brought enough money. Unexpectedly, he was a step too late. He'd just arrived at the mountain foot when he saw people coming down, one after another. It was here that Yuan Ying heard about the spectacular events that had happened at the conference, and then that Yan Wushi had taken Shen Qiao. He was fretting over this when he encountered Yu Shengyan, who'd also been descending the mountain. Yuan Ying's appearance wasn't anything remarkable, and he was dressed like any other passerby. Few people would pay special notice to him, but Yu Shengyan noticed that whenever Yuan Ying heard people talking about Shen Qiao, he'd always look up and listen. This piqued Yu Shengyan's interest. When asked, Yuan Ying declared his family and sect. Only then did Yu Shengyan realize that he was Shen Qiao's Shidi. After listening to Yuan Ying recount all this, Shen Qiao sank into contemplation for a long while. Finally, he said, "Who was the elder who implied they'd be able to support you in becoming the sect leader?" "It was Zhang Bunchu," said Yuan Ying. "Elder Zhang." Xuandu Mountain had continued to this day, passed from one generation to the next. Though the mountains had been sealed off for a long time, the sect had quite a few internal branching factions. Taking Qi Fengge's branch as an example, one could call it the orthodox main branch, hence the position of sect leader was theirs. For the other elders, their martial arts could be traced back to the second generation sect leaders' fellow disciples. Though they all came from Xuandu's Violet Palace just the same, each of them had one or two secret techniques that were only passed down within their specific branches. Therefore, strictly speaking, most of the elders of Xuandu Mountain belonged to the same generation as Shen Qiao and the others, but there were also those from more senior generations, his martial uncles. Zhang Bunchu was one of them. Yu Ai was able to successfully become the sect leader because 7 of the elders supported him. I trust that one of them must have been Zhang Bunchu. Yuan Ying nodded and said, "Yes." "What about Da Shishong?" said Shen Qiao. "You're ranked 4th. If he approached you, you must have approached Da Shishong already, right?" Yuan Ying was a bit flustered. This I don't know. I spend all day inside the house reading and practicing the sword, or teaching those disciples swordplay. Having said this, he looked ashamed and said, "Shishong, I'm sorry." His apology wasn't only because he'd been unable to answer Shen Qiao's question, but more to express his regrets on not being able to do anything for Shen Qiao when he fell from the cliff before. But Shen Qiao wasn't angry. Instead, he patted Yuan Ying's shoulder the way he had in the past. "No need to apologize. You dislike conflicts with others by nature, and you rarely leave the sect. But this time, you were able to realize that something was wrong and left the mountain to look for me. That's already incredible. So, after meeting Zhang Bunchu, you didn't tell Yu Ai about the situation?" Yuan Ying flushed a little. No, I didn't. Previously, Wushi Mei told me that he was involved in your fall from the cliff, so I was wary of him. Shen Qiao gave a slight sigh and said no more. Yan Wusher's gaze paused for a moment on Shen Qiao's hand, which was resting on Yuan Ying's shoulder, and then he lazily said, Since Yuan Shudi has arrived, he can stay here. Your complexion is sallow, and you appear malnourished. Let's have the chef build you back up. Shen Qiao glanced at him and thought to himself, Who is your Shudi? The words rolled about in his throat, but Taoist Master Shen was kind-hearted by nature, so he ultimately said nothing. Yu Shengyan, meanwhile, was stunned. He couldn't have imagined that his Shitsuan, who, despite his warm act, possessed a cold heart, would look at Yuan Ying with special regard. And why would he lower his own seniority to talk to Yuan Ying as an equal? Just where did this little stutterer borrow such a huge face from? To the point that my Shitsuan has to honorably address you as Shirdi? And you're not even trembling in terror while shedding tears of gratitude? Of course, Yuan Ying wasn't trembling in terror. He had no idea who Yan Wushi was. When he heard the man say to let him stay, he quickly turned to look at his Shixiong for his opinion. It was obvious that he was an obedient child who respected his master and his teachings. Shen Qiao saw him looking over and smiled. Since Sect Leader Yan has sincerely invited you, you should accept. Yuan Ying had seen Yu Shengyan bowing to Yan Wushi earlier, so he should have realized Yan Wushi's identity then. Instead, he'd been caught unawares, only understanding now. He quickly cupped his hands. Thank you, Sect Leader Yan. Then I'll be troubling you. In the past, forget just one Yuan Ying. Even if there'd been 10 Yuan Yings, Yan Wushi wouldn't have paid them any attention. However, today was not the past. Yuan Ying was Shen Qiao's Shidi, which ultimately made him more unique in Yan Wushi's eyes. However, it was clear that Qi Fengge was truly unconventional when accepting disciples. He had 5 disciples beneath him, each with different temperaments, and disciples as simple and dull as Yuan Ying were rare indeed. After Yu Shengyan glumly led Yuan Ying away to settle him in, Shen Qiao looked at the Weiqi board in somewhat of a daze. Yan Wushi immediately saw through his thoughts. Do you wish to go to Xuandu Mountain? Shen Qiao pulled himself together. Yes, I want to go back and take a look. He'd wanted to go back for some time, but his previous strength had been insufficient and he didn't want to take risks. But things were different now. His strength had more or less returned. Even against exceptional figures like Buddhist Master Xue Ting, he'd still have a fighting chance. In any case, Xuandu Mountain would always be the sect where he'd grown up. Even if Shen Qiao had no intention of taking the position of sect leader, he would not allow anyone with ulterior motives to attempt to destroy the pure land of his heart. If Zhang Bunchu had sought out Yuan Ying, that meant that Yu Ai had failed to live up to his expectations. There must have been conflicts between the two, perhaps significant enough that Zhang Bunchu wished to expel Yu Ai from the position of sect leader. Considering this along with the information Huanyue's sect had obtained, if anyone claimed that there was outside intervention involved, Shen Qiao would never believe it. That's fine, said Yan Wushi. It's about time anyway. With your current martial prowess, you might not be able to chop Yu Ai into 8 pieces, but stabbing a sword through his heart should be doable. Shen Qiao was left almost speechless. Just because I'm going doesn't mean I have to kill someone. Can you not spout such bloodthirsty words all the time? Yan Wushi gave him a playful smile. I fear that you won't be able to help it. Xuandu Mountain is like a chunk of rich meat that's been locked in a cage. Now that the cage has an opening, do you really expect those beasts that have been eyeing it hungrily for so long not to pounce? Shen Qiao didn't like his description, but he also understood that he was right. This was Xuandu Mountain's current situation. Though Yu Ai was a skilled martial artist, people often lacked caution when it came to internal affairs, just like Shen Qiao himself in the beginning. Actually, added Yan Wushi, I've received a message saying that after Hehuan sect lost a huge chunk of influence in Chang'an, they grew very close to the Gokturks. Shen Qiao frowned. You're saying that Hehuan sect will also intervene in Xuandu Mountain's affairs? That I do not know. You'll be alone on this trip, so why don't I lend you one of my disciples to assist you? Which one would you like, Bian Yan Mei or Yu Shengyan? These are Shendu Mountain's internal issues, said Shen Qiao. How can I trouble them? Yan Wushi said deliberately, You're saying that you want this venerable one to personally accompany you? Shen Qiao was an honest man. He'd never had such intentions. Yan Wushi's words stunned him. Yan Wushi didn't wait for a reply but smiled and said, Unfortunately, I can't fulfill your wish at this time. My injuries from the previous battle with Xue Ting have yet to heal. Even if I go, I may not be able to help. Shen Qiao had personally checked his pulse last time, so he had a very clear idea of the stage of his injuries. Yet, hearing Yan Wushi now, for some reason, deep down, he was no longer sure. It's been so long, he said, reaching out. Why has it yet to heal? Yan Wushi didn't move in the slightest. He maintained his posture, leaning against the pillow, and let Shen Qiao place his hand on his wrist. After freezing for a moment, Shen Qiao's expression fell. How can this be? Chapter 116. Change of Sect Leaders. Originally, Shen Qiao had thought that Yan Wushi's injuries weren't serious. After so many days, even if he wasn't fully healed, they should have recovered by half. But the moment he checked his pulse this time, he discovered that Yan Wushi's meridians were congested, his circulation sluggish. There was a faint evidence of blood stasis. If anything, he seemed even worse than before. Was it Xue Ting? Could his martial prowess have achieved the level where his strikes only looked shallow, but could actually penetrate deep within? But if Xue Ting had reached this level of skill, how could he lose to Yan Wushi, let alone allow Yan Wushi to destroy his martial arts? Yan Wushi covered his mouth and coughed twice, then solved the mystery for him. It's because I've been busy managing the affairs of Huanyu Sect these days. Our power and influence have been dispersed, so first we must slowly regather. Thus, I've had no time to heal, though I didn't expect it to be this serious. Shen Qiao frowned and said, It concerns your own health. How could you be so careless? Yan Wushi smiled. He clearly wasn't taking it seriously. Don't worry. It's not a fatal injury. I'll recover in 5 days at most. Shen Qiao thought for a moment, then took out a porcelain bottle from his pocket and placed it on the table. The foundations of our internal cultivation, the Tao and the demonic, are antithetical to one another, so I can't assist you. However, Shendu Mountain has quite a few excellent medications for external injuries that have been passed down from generation to generation in Shendu Mountain. This is one I recently had the pharmacy prepare, based off a prescription. If you're willing to trust me, try taking it now. 3 pills a day. It will alleviate your injuries. Yan Wushi picked up the porcelain bottle. It felt a little warm against his palm, still carrying some of Shen Qiao's body heat. His thumb caressed the delicate porcelain bottle with an air of indescribable suggestiveness. Shen Qiao didn't think much of it. He thought that Yan Wushi was suspicious and didn't trust him, that he'd accepted it on the surface but would secretly throw the medicine away later. That would be a huge waste. In any case, the bottle contained quite a few precious medicinal ingredients, likely enough to save a few number of people. So he added, If you're not going to take any, give it back to me. In any case, your injuries aren't anything serious. Why wouldn't I take it? Yan Wushi was amused to see him staring anxiously at the porcelain bottle. He deliberately went against what Shen Qiao asked. He pulled out the stopper and tipped 3 pills into his palm, then took the plum juice in front of Shen Qiao and swallowed them with the liquid. I feel like the stuffiness here is gone, he said, rubbing his chest. Suddenly, it's completely clear. This isn't a divine elixir. Yan Wushi laughed. I was talking about the plum juice. I heard that Taoist cultivators can add even their body fluids to medicine. You just drank this plum juice, so doesn't it contain your body fluids? What could Shen Qiao say in the face of such vulgar language? Even though he'd heard plenty of shameless words constantly throughout the day already, he couldn't stop the faint flush from surfacing on his fair face. Yan Wushi saw the shame and irritation in his gaze. Without a word, Shen Qiao braced his hand on the table to stand, ready to leave, but Yan Wushi held down his hand and smiled. All right. It's the medicine that was effective, not the body fluids. When did you go and prepare the pills? How come I didn't know? Shen Qiao's face was stony. Must this humble Taoist report everything to Sect Leader Yan? Of course not, but I'm concerned about you. I'm worried that you won't have enough money and that someone will take advantage of you. So, that's how foolish this humble Taoist appears in Sect Lian's eyes? Are you not? If you weren't foolish, could I have sold you to Sang Jingxing without you even being the wiser? But outwardly, Yan Wushi continued to smile and said, That's not true. You've been improving day by day since you left the mountain. I've seen it myself. You're much smarter than you were in the past. Shen Qiao had endured and endured, but he finally couldn't take it anymore. Looking at Sect Leader Yan now, he doesn't seem like he has any internal injuries. Perhaps he'll be able to recover even faster if he talks some more. That's not enough, said Yan Wushi with a smile. Without the excellent medicine known as Taoist Master Shen, my recovery is destined to be slower. But I heard that Yang Jian sent you a sum of money. He did, said Shen Qiao. The money was used to build Xuandu Monastery. So you're really planning on staying in Chang'an long term? That's hard to say. I wish to go back to Xuandu Mountain first, to see if that matter can be resolved. In the future, when Xuandu Mountain wants to re-enter the secular world, it'll have an additional foothold in Chang'an. I think Yang Jian will make an ambitious and talented emperor. He isn't one of those foolish, prejudiced rulers, and he's tolerant toward the Taoist discipline. Perhaps Taoism will have the chance to welcome a second rise. He only did this to win over people's hearts, Yan Wushi reminded him. Shen Qiao smiled. I know, but there's nothing wrong with that. Though I'm a Taoist practitioner myself, I dare not say that Taoism is wholly free from degenerates. Having hundreds of schools of thought all contending with each other is a blessing for the common folk. That way, we can avoid the kind of situation where an emperor plunders the citizens' assets in the interest of one discipline, leaving them destitute. Yang Jian is deeply influenced by Buddhism, yet he can still treat Confucianism and Taoism fairly. In my opinion, this is the magnanimity that a ruler should demonstrate. Most importantly, if Xuandu Mountain wants to enter the secular world, now is a good time. Yan Wushi raised an eyebrow. Didn't you admire everything about Qi Fengge? Why are you contradicting his opinion on this matter? That was then. This is now, said Shen Qiao. No such opportunity existed when my late master was alive. If he were still here, I'm sure he'd agree with my ideas. Oh, if you put it that way, this venerable one understands. Understands what? Whenever you want to do something, you'll just say that Qi Fengge would agree. Whenever you don't, you'll just say that you're respecting Qi Fengge's will. Either way, he's dead. He can't jump out to refute you. He worded this deliberately, but to his surprise, Shen Qiao didn't grow angry from embarrassment. Instead, he thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. You're not wrong about that. As he smiled, his eyes sparkled, shimmering brightly until the room seemed to fill with light. Even Yan Wushi's gaze upon him couldn't help but still for a moment. My late master was more reasonable than anyone else. He would have understood my thoughts. Yan Wushi raised his eyebrow. He completely disagreed with Shen Qiao's constant praise of his shifu, but he'd always boasted himself as being graciously tolerant. Naturally, he wasn't going to split hairs over a dead man. From this, one could see that Shen Qiao was righteous by nature. He was by no means a person bound by rules. This was precisely why, out of the 5 disciples, Qi Fengge had ultimately chosen Shen Qiao to be his successor. Since you accepted that title from the court, even if you're not obligated to obey his orders, you still have a nominal relationship with the court, Yan Wushi said. As such, Xuandu Mountain's affairs can't be completely considered your own personal matters. With the current relationship between Huanyue Sect and the Sui dynasty, if Yang Jian knew you were going to Xuandu Mountain, even if I said nothing, he would still ask me to help. I will let Bianyan accompany you on this trip. He is more tactful and will be able to lend you some assistance. Now that he'd mentioned this reason, Shen Qiao no longer declined. He nodded. Thank you very much, then. He hesitated for a moment, then said, You're injured. It's better for you to rest quietly the next few days. Don't keep jumping about everywhere. Yan Wushi's smile widened. Ah, Qiao, are you worried about me? No, said Shen Qiao. You're lying, said Yan Wushi. Shen Qiao said nothing. Then why did you even ask? Yan Wushi sighed. Although I am very moved, I am doomed to disappoint your expectations. Don't forget that the bald old donkey is still waiting for me to take care of him. In the end, he was still the grand and lofty state preceptor of Zhou, a leader of Buddhism. I can't give him the cold shoulder for too long. Now can I? From what I saw, you had no problems doing so, Shen Qiao thought to himself, but he caught on to a specific word in Yan Wusher's reply. You wish to kill him? I'm going to exchange him for another astronomical benefit, Yan Wusher replied lazily. As for what astronomical benefit that was, if he was unwilling to say, Shen Qiao wouldn't be able to pry it out of him, so he asked no further. A few days later, upon hearing that Shen Qiao was preparing to return to Xuandu Mountain, Yuan Ying was delighted and came to ask when Shen Qiao would depart. But Shen Qiao didn't plan on taking him, as Xuandu Monastery was still under construction and needed someone to supervise. Yuan Ying was undoubtedly the best candidate. Upon hearing Shen Qiao's plans, Yuan Ying's face immediately fell, his joy dissolving into disappointment. The change was so obvious, it was almost unbearable. Shen Qiao thought this odd. Sushudi, do you wish to return to Xuandu Mountain that badly? No, that's not it. Yuan Ying struggled to explain his unhappiness. These days, Yu Shengyan had been toying with him whenever he had nothing to do. Yuan Ying couldn't outtalk him, and though he was stronger than Yu Shengyan never made it physical. Yuan Ying was an honest child. There was no way he could strike first. He also thought that, as a guest, he couldn't make things difficult for his Arshishong, so he'd endured it all. He'd long ranked Yu Shengyan at the top of the list of most troublesome characters. Shen Qiao patted him on the shoulder. I know you've devoted yourself to cultivating the Dao, ignoring all external affairs, but I can't think of a more suitable person than you to supervise the construction of Xuandu Monastery. I'll try to come back as soon as possible, but I can only trouble you to help out first. Yuan Ying hurriedly said, Arshishong, you go ahead. I'll go every day to supervise. You don't need to worry. Thank you, Ah Ying. Arshishong, you don't need to thank me. We trained under the same Shutsuan, but I'm the most useless one. I've never been able to help much, and I always felt very, very uneasy inside. It's rare for you to give me a task, so I'm very excited. After such a long separation, this Sushudi, who'd always jumped to hide behind others, had also matured. Shen Qiao was quite pleased. By the time he'd made proper arrangements, Yan Wusher had already left Chang'an, one step ahead of him. Now, Shen Qiao and Bian Yanmei also set off for Xuandu Mountain. Bian Yanmei was a rather interesting person. The way he did things was interesting, and the way he spoke was interesting as well. But he had an excellent sense of what and what not to do, unlike Yan Wusher, who'd often embarrass Shen Qiao into a rage by going overboard. Traveling with such a person was naturally as pleasant as a spring breeze. Furthermore, Shen Qiao himself had never been hard to get along with and also made for an excellent companion. He didn't enjoy showing off and was willing to patiently listen to others. Not to mention, if they ran into danger, he'd become the most reliable of helpers. Anyone would wish to have this type of friend. Bian Yanmei hadn't interacted much with Shen Qiao, but he'd spent a great deal of time in the imperial court and possessed an acute insight into the human heart. People like Shen Qiao would never betray their friends, so Bian Yanmei was naturally willing to make friends with him. As the saying went, having one more friend meant having one more avenue of retreat. Though Bian Yanmei had been taught and raised completely by Yan Wusher and was intrinsically quite similar to his Shifu, he was a bit slicker and more sophisticated by several notches. In addition, Bian Yanmei had already realized how Yan Wusher felt, so he deliberately tried to make nice with Shen Qiao on the journey. So, of course, the two got along quite well. They both possessed Qinggong and had swift horses with them. If they traveled day and night, they'd arrive in 3 to 5 days. If they instead chose to travel by day and rest during the night, it'd still take only a dozen or so days. If Shen Qiao had been alone, traveling through the night wouldn't have been an issue. But with Bian Yanmei accompanying him, he naturally couldn't force him to rush toward their destination. So, after about 10 days, the pair finally arrived at Xuandu Town, at the foot of Xuandu Mountain. Seeing the bustling town, Bian couldn't help but smile. In the past 2 years, Shendu town has become more prosperous, he said. I also visited a few years ago, and I only remember that there were fewer people then. Shen Qiao also hadn't been here for a long time. He looked around and said, yes, though the Green Mountains remain unchanged, things might be constant, but the people are not. He'd grown up in the mountains since childhood and was also very familiar with Xuandu town. The feelings he was having at this site were naturally much stronger than Bian. At this moment, the two of them were sitting at the tea house, resting and drinking tea. When the nearby waiter heard their words, he came over and interjected. I fear that this kind of excitement won't last long. What do you mean? The waiter sighed. You two must also know that these fields below the mountain belong to the Taoist priests on Xuandu Mountain. The previous masters sympathized with our difficult lives and charged very little rent, for which we were grateful. Otherwise, Xuandu town wouldn't have the bustle and liveliness it does these days. But I don't know what the new leader thinks. A few days ago, he suddenly said he would increase the year's rent, and by a very large amount. How will we endure this? Even those who run inns and restaurants or tea houses like ours have to pay rent. If this continues, who dare to continue with their businesses? Our boss said that once this month finishes, we should pack things up and return to our hometown. The new sect leader, Yu. The waiter shook his head. I don't think his surname was Yu. I heard that he only became sect leader last month, and he was previously perfected Master Qi's eldest disciple? Tan? Yes, his surname was Tan. Shen Qiao and Bian exchanged a glance. But I heard before that it was sect leader Yu, said Shen Qiao, suppressing the towering waves of alarm rising within his heart. How did it change to sect leader Tan? The waiter scratched his head. This lowly one doesn't know. After a couple of more idle words, he saw another guest enter for tea and quickly went over to greet them, putting Shen Qiao's table aside. Shen Qiao slowly furrowed his brows and said, How did Da Shushong end up becoming sect leader? Where's Yu? We set out at the end of last month and arrived here at the start of a new one, so it's also possible we missed the news along the way, said Bian. We can ask someone about this later. Taoist Master Shen need not feel anxious. We can head up the mountain after we've clarified the situation. Very well. To understand the situation, the two of them had to first find a place to stay, either a relay station or an inn, which were always good places to ask for news. Bian was no stranger to this and took to it with the ease of a light carriage on the familiar road. He led Shen Qiao into an inn that was neither large nor small. Merchants and the people of the Jianghu all share a particular characteristic, he said. Unless they come from a wealthy family, they will never go to places that are too high class. On the contrary, most of them would choose average places like this. Asking for news here is the best option. Shen Qiao naturally had no objection and nodded in agreement. Xuandu's Violet Palace was also a major Taoist sect. Since Yu had announced that he was opening the mountain gates, many young people had come here seeking a master to learn martial arts under. Some of these people were descended from people of the Jianghu, but came from families which had fallen into decline by the current generation. Others had heard many stories of martial heroes and yearned for the flash of steel and blades. There was no lack of people with good aptitude among them, but, without exception, absolutely none of them were from wealthy family. If they were, their families would have naturally arranged better futures for them, so they'd have no need to come all the way here, crossing thousands of miles to seek a master. However, it was as Bian said. Due to this, they would choose to rest at this kind of inn, neither too luxurious nor too shabby. The main lobby on the first floor was filled with the clamor of various noises. Bian and Shen Qiao entered and found a place to sit down. Coincidentally, several young people with swords sat next to them, and there was no need for them to ask around more. The other party had already started talking about the recent events of the Jianghu. Have you heard? Said one of the youths. The Huanyue sect leader sent a letter of challenge to Hulu Gu. Shen Qiao was about to pick up his cup, but when he heard this, his heart shook and his body froze. Chapter 117, Care and Thought. Those who'd never witnessed Hulugu's strength firsthand might not feel anything upon hearing this news. From their perspective, Yan Wushi had been able to come out unscathed after a group ambush from 5 great martial arts experts, so he indeed should have the ability and confidence to challenge him. So as soon as this news fell, it was like a drop of water splashing into a pot of oil, and the surroundings immediately began to boil over. Surprise or excitement colored the faces of many, and they all began to ask for details. When did this happen? Just a few days ago. They said that Sect Leader Yan issued a letter of challenge to Hulugu. Hulugu was eating at the time, and he was so shocked he leapt up and almost choked to death. You speak as if you were watching right next to him. Who's Hulugu? You don't even know Hulugu? Then do you know Qifeng? Nonsense. Would I come seeking a master at Shendu Mountain if I didn't? Then how come you haven't heard of Hulugu? More than 20 years ago, Qifeng fought the Gokturk master, then forced him to swear not to enter the Central Plains for 2 decades. At the Qingcheng Mountain Sword Trial Conference, Hulugu defeated Shen Qiao with only a few moves. Many people said that Liuli Palace didn't announce the identity of the #1 martial artist in all the land. Hulugu was exactly that, both in name and in reality. Yan Wushi must have been dissatisfied with this, and that's why he sent him a letter of challenge. Don't bring it up anymore. I originally wanted to go to the sword trial conference, but my nag of a mom wouldn't let me. She said it was too dangerous. Before I came to Shendu Mountain to look for a master this time, I had to secretly discuss things with my father first and ask him to stall my mother. Only then could I come out. The cacophony of voices gradually faded into a murmur in Shen Qiao's ears. His thoughts were still stuck on the words from before. It wasn't until Mei shoved the cup into his hands that he realized that he remained in the same position the entire time, completely still. Thank you very much. Shen Qiao took the cup and poured some green bamboo juice into it. Before we left, did Sect Leader Yan bring this up to you? As soon as he'd asked it, he felt that this question was somewhat unnecessary. Yan Wushi's personality meant he often did unexpected things. Even he might not have seen this coming had they still been alive, let alone his disciples. But Mei's answer was even more surprising. The challenge letter is real. Shen Qiao was stunned. Isn't he still injured? Mei pondered for a moment, then said, I have a couple of thoughts about this matter. Shutsuan didn't do this on a whim or to make a show of doing something shocking. There is a reason behind it. I wish to know the details. I heard that while you were on Qingcheng Mountain, you and Hulugu fought? Shen Qiao nodded. We did. Hulugu had emerged from 20 years of seclusion, and he's even stronger than in the past. I fear that fighting him to a draw at my current level would be incredibly difficult. Shen Qiao had always been honest, and he believed that victory was victory, defeat was defeat. He didn't find it difficult to talk about his own defeat. No matter how formidable the enemy was, he'd only tell it like it was. He'd never exaggerate or dress it up. Mei said, in Taoist Master Shen's opinion, if Shutsuan and Hulugu fought, what would be his chance of victory? Shen Qiao frowned and thought for a moment, then said, if he's injured, it might be 50-50. But this only held if Yan Wushi was in good condition, having abundant internal power and no injuries at all. Hearing this reply, worry revealed itself on Mei's face. It was a long time before he spoke again. I'm certain the Gokturks will intervene in Shendu Mountain's affairs, he said. You killed Kunye, and Hulugu is doubtless unwilling to let that slide. He might even disregard his honor as a master martial artist and personally participate himself. But now that Shutsuan has sent this challenge letter, Hulugu won't be able to spare the time to concern himself with you, so it reduced some of the obstacles before Taoist Master Shen. Shen Qiao froze. He'd thought about many possibilities, and the one he'd considered the most likely was simply that Yan Wushi wished to conquer the throne of the #1 martial artist in the world. Shen Qiao had never expected that the true answer would be this one. Mei stealthily observed Shen Qiao's reaction. He had gone completely still. He wondered to himself if Shen Qiao had gone catatonic from all the emotion and called out to him. Taoist Master Shen? But Shen Qiao didn't weep with gratitude the way he'd expected. After his initial silence, he appeared incredibly calm. Whatever the case, we're already here. After all the help your Shitsuin has offered, if I don't resolve the issue here first, how would I have the face to meet him? Bianyan Mei nodded. Let's ask someone about the situation on the mountain first. Then we can ascend it tomorrow. Very well. Both men exuded refinement and grace, especially Shen Qiao, who was still carrying a long sword and dressed in Taoist robes. Before long, he attracted the attention of the young men next to him, and one of the ones who'd just been talking loudly mustered the courage to speak to him. May I ask if this Taoist master is from Xuandu's Violet Palace? Shen Qiao had been hoping for the opportunity to find a disciple who'd come down the mountain, so he may ask his questions. But when he saw them, he had a new idea. No, he said, this humble Taoist is Shen Qiao. I came here to ascend the mountain and visit a friend. What about you, young friends? Hearing Shen Qiao's no, the young man was somewhat disappointed, but since he'd taken the initiative to come and ask, he couldn't really just brush Shen Qiao off. We came to seek apprenticeship. This one is Duan Ying, and these two are my friends, Zhang Chao and Zhong Bojing. The three cupped their hands as Shen Qiao and Bianyan Mei. Shen Qiao nodded and slightly raised his own hands to return the greeting. Duan Ying didn't mind, but the other two were displeased when they saw how this Taoist had only nodded and raised his hands in a perfunctory greeting. He hadn't even stood. In truth, with Shen Qiao's actual identity, no one would have criticized him if he simply hadn't moved at all, never mind only lifting his hands in greeting. Duan Ying asked, since Taoist Master Shen Qiao is visiting his friends on the mountain, he must know the perfected masters of Xuandu Mountain, right? We have long admired the grace exemplified by Xuandu's Violet Palace, so we wish to join the sect. We heard that Xuandu Mountain only accepts disciples twice a year on the spring and autumn equinoxes, but the timing of our arrival was unfortunate. Could we ask Taoist Master Shen Qiao to introduce us? When he asked this question, his two companions also looked at Shen Qiao with expectant gazes. Shen Qiao gave a laugh and said, Actually, I'm not familiar with either the sect leader or the elders, but rather with another Taoist priest on the mountain, one responsible for lighting the stoves, so I won't be able to help you. Their expressions filled with disappointment. Seeing this, Shen Qiao added, However, every 5 days, several Taoist priests will come down the mountain to make purchases. There's a pastry shop selling snacks next to the inn, which is a favorite of the priests on the mountain. If you keep an eye on it, you might be able to meet them soon. Hearing him say this, Duan Ying and the rest glanced at each other, then said, If this is true, thank you very much for informing us, Taoist Master. Shen Qiao waved his hand. No need to be polite. If you can enter the sect, this humble Taoist will have 3 more friends at Xuandu Mountain. Isn't that quite an honor as well? Duan Ying felt this Taoist priest was not only good-looking, but he also spoke in a kindly manner, so he instantly formed a favorable impression of him. He spoke quite a few words of thanks and started discussing Taoist classics with Shen Qiao. It wasn't until Zhong Bojing and Zhang Chao urged him that he bid farewell. Bianyan Mei had spent the entire time watching dispassionately from the sidelines. Now he finally spoke up. That Zhang Chao's aptitude is quite decent. The other 2 are only mediocre. Shen Qiao smiled but didn't speak. In fact, he preferred Duan Ying out of the 3. It wasn't because he'd spoken with him the most, but because Duan Ying had been respectful and courteous even without knowing their identities. This made him appear more steadier and gentler compared to the other 2. A person's aptitude was naturally important, but their sense of martial honor was even more so. If it were up to Shen Qiao, he would pass over the better qualified Zhang Chao in favor of the comparatively mediocre Duan Ying. That night, Shen Qiao and Bianyan Mei stayed at the inn. As luck would have it, the room shared by Duan Ying and his companions was very close to theirs. The trio heeded Shen Qiao's words. Early the next morning, they began keeping watch at the pastry shop. Sure enough, they didn't need to wait too long before 2 young Taoists arrived at the shop. A glance was enough to tell them that the 2 had come from Xuandu Mountain. Duan Ying and the others were overjoyed and quickly went up to them, explaining who they were and why they'd come to the mountain. Then they asked the Taoist priests if they could take them up the mountain as potential disciples. Unexpectedly, the other party refused. Xuandu Mountain only accepts disciples on the spring and autumn equinoxes every year. You didn't arrive during the correct time period. Please wait until the next time. Duan Ying pleaded, "We have admired Xuandu Mountain for a long time, and we're willing to accept hardships. It's fine, even if we can only be accepted and enlisted as lay disciples. We ask these two Taoist masters to please help us." The slightly older Taoist was somewhat friendlier and more good-natured. He said to them, "Some things have been happening at Xuandu Mountain recently. The perfected masters on the top are all busy, and they won't have the leisure to accept disciples. You truly came at a bad time. Why not go to Qingcheng Mountain to try your luck?" Xuandu Mountain and Qingcheng Mountain were nowhere near each other. With that distance, one couldn't just casually walk over. Hearing these words, Duan Ying and his companions' faces practically overflowed with misery. They pleaded again and again, but the Taoists refused to waver, so the three youths could only leave disappointed. "Ha! Yuan Chang Shudi, why did you answer them so resolutely?" the older Taoist said. "Perhaps when we go back and report this, Shitsuan would be willing to accept them? The mountain is going through troubled times now, and Shitsuan is clearly unwilling to interfere. How could he possibly accept any disciples now? Then why not have them find the acting sect leader? I find them quite pitiful." "The acting sect leader can't spare any time either. I heard that people from Hehuan Sect will arrive soon. Who knows if the acting sect leader will even be able to hold on to his position then? Don't be so harsh with your words, Yuan Chang Shudi." "What are you scared of? No one can hear me. I must say, times were better when Sect Leader Shen was here. Everyone was harmonious and friendly, unlike now, where everyone is suspicious of everyone else. Will we ever have peaceful days again?" The young Taoist known as Yuan Chang Shudi curled his lips. However, the next moment, his expression immediately transformed into one of shock. Sect Leader Shen? Seeing the person in front of him now, Yuan Chang, whose tongue was normally so agile, was shocked into stuttering. Chapter 118. Conference. The two Taoist priests were as dumbfounded as if they'd seen a ghost in broad daylight, but Shen Qiao took no pride in frightening them. "It's been a while, Xiao Yuan Chang," he said. "You've grown quite a bit taller." Then his gaze shifted to the other person, his expression as gentle as it had been in the past, almost unchanged. "Le An has also made great leaps in his martial arts. You noticed me even before I appeared." Le An and Yuan Chang exchanged a glance, and after their initial moment of panic, they quickly bowed. "Greetings to Shen Shushu. We hope Shen Shushu is well." "How has your Shifu been?" asked Shen Qiao. "Thank you, Shushu, for your inquiry. Shifu is in good health. Ever since Shushu left the mountain, his esteemed self would often talk about you. If he knew that your esteemed self was safe and sound, he'd be overjoyed." Though his Shifu was from the same generation as Shen Qiao, he was much older and had devoted himself to his cultivation on Xuandu Mountain. He rarely concerned himself with the mundane affairs of the sect. It was only during his later years that he accepted these two disciples. "I also miss Kong Shushong very much," said Shen Qiao. "I was about to head up the mountain to say hello to him." Upon hearing his words, the two young Taoists immediately showed completely different reactions. Yuan Chang's face shone with delight, while Le An's expression was filled with concern. Shen Qiao took in all these shifts in emotion, then deliberately said, "Why? Are you not coming with me?" Yuan Chang was an outspoken young man. Before Le An could speak, he'd already said, "Shen Shushu is willing to return? We couldn't be happier." Shen Qiao smiled. "But I don't think your Le An Shushong looks particularly happy." Le An quickly cupped his hands and said, "Shen Shushu speaks too seriously. It's just that Sect Leader Yu's whereabouts are currently unknown, meaning the situation is somewhat chaotic. We don't wish to be caught up in it, so we originally planned on going down the mountain and lying low until the storm passes, but we didn't expect to encounter you." In the beginning, when Shen Qiao had fought Kunye and lost, falling from the cliff, the Jianghu had been rife with rumors for a period of time. Some of those rumors made their way back to Xuandu Mountain, greatly impacting Shen Qiao's reputation. Though no one said anything, they'd all believed that Shen Qiao's loss to Kunye had caused Xuandu Mountain's standing to plummet precipitously, losing them a great deal of faith. This attitude meant that afterward, when Yu Ai became sect leader, few people opposed him. They all thought that Yu Ai had the means and capability, that maybe he could lead Xuandu Mountain to best its revival. But at that time, Lu An and Yuan Chang's Shifu hadn't been optimistic about Yu Ai, so he forbade them from participating in sect affairs. This master and his 2 disciples stayed out of everyone's sight, maintaining a weak presence within the sect. Both his disciples were young and eager for achievements, so while they obeyed their Shifu's orders, they couldn't help but silently criticize him deep down. However, recent developments had been beyond their expectations, proving their Shifu correct. Yu Ai encountered a bottleneck in his cooperation with the Gokturks, and at this time, the situation in the Central Plains was already changing constantly and rapidly. With the changeover of the northern dynasties from Zhou to Sui, the Gokturks' hold over the Central Plains was gradually weakening, causing Xuandu Mountain's standing to become increasingly awkward. And yet, right at this moment, the sect leader Yu Ai suddenly disappeared overnight. Xuandu Mountain was left without a head, and so Tan Yuanchun, the eldest of Qi Fengge's disciples, temporarily took over the position. But though Tan Yuanchun used to be an elder, his personality wasn't forceful enough to maintain a firm grip on the sect. Therefore, many people on Xuandu Mountain voiced their objections. Among them was Elder Liu Yue, who opposed him the most vehemently. Both parties were locked in a silent power struggle, and the 2 sides inevitably tried to win over others to increase their influence. Lu An and Yuan Chang's Shifu used his seclusion as an excuse to avoid seeing outsiders. But people came knocking for their disciples several times. This annoyed them to the point they were left with no choice but to swap errands with others, giving themselves the duty of going down the mountain to make purchases. In fact, they were using the opportunity to hide and obtain some peace and quiet. After listening to them relate the sequence of events, Shen Qiao was silent for a moment. Then he said, Yu Ai was the sect leader, so he possessed martial skills far beyond average. Furthermore, he was on Xuandu Mountain, so how could he just disappear overnight? Did the 2 of you hear any rumors? They both shook their heads. Shifu gave us orders. We're still young, so we're not allowed to participate in sect affairs. However, just a few days before Yu Shushu disappeared, a Gokturk envoy came up the mountain, wanting us to do something. But Yu Shushu refused. The 2 sides parted on bad terms, so many people said that Yu Shudi's disappearance was related to the Gokturks. This matched most of what Yuan Ying had said. Shen Qiao asked, Did you recognize the Gokturk envoy from that day? Both Lu An and Yuan Chang said they didn't. The 2 disciples didn't know much, so at this point in the conversation, there was nothing more to ask them. I wish to head up the mountain, Shen Qiao said. Will you come with me, or will you stay at the foot of the mountain for now? The pair looked at each other. Then Yuan Chang said, We'll go up the mountain with you, Shen Shushu, lest you end up at a disadvantage. Lu An had no time to cover Yuan Chang's mouth, so he could only remain silent, which could count as him tacitly agreeing with his Shudi's words. Shen Qiao smiled. Though Yuan Chang spoke a little thoughtlessly, he was frank and straightforward. Lu An was slightly more fearful, but he wasn't a bad person either. Otherwise, he would have spoken up and refused. Never mind. You finally found some free time to come down the mountain and play, he told them. Stay at the foot of the mountain and enjoy yourselves. It won't be too late if you want to return 2 days later. Lu An had seen that Shen Qiao's ascent up the mountain couldn't be a good thing. Perhaps he wanted to regain his position as sect leader, which would inevitably require the support of the elders. At first, he thought that Shen Qiao was going to drag them up the mountain, using them to make their Shifu stand in line. But to his surprise, Shen Qiao mentioned nothing of it. Lu An had purely been judging his upright character through his own moral failings. Shen Qiao's candid, straightforward manner made Lu An feel a little embarrassed, so he quickly spoke up to express his opinion. With the position of sect leader currently yet to be determined, Xuandu Mountain cannot have a single day of peace. Shan Shushu, Your esteemed self was the only sect leader who perfected Master Qi personally designated. The implication within his words was that, though they wouldn't interfere, if they had to support someone, they were sure to choose Shen Qiao. This tiny bit of consideration was really too meager when placed before Shen Qiao, but it was obviously not Shen Qiao's style to quibble with a young man. "Thank you very much." He patted Le An's shoulder and said, "Don't make mischief or trouble here below the mountain. Come back soon." His tone was ordinary, as if this was just some everyday chiding. Any passerby would have thought that Shen Qiao was only hiking up the mountain for some exercise. The two young Taoists stared blankly at Shen Qiao and Bian Mei's retreating backs for a while. Then Yuan Chang suddenly said, "Shishong, we should have gone up the mountain with Shen Shushu just now." Shi Cuan's words last time were full of self-blame that he hadn't stood up to speak out for Shen Shushu that day. If his esteemed self saw us shirking responsibility and cowering away, he'd be disappointed. Right now, Elder Liu wishes to become the sect leader so badly. I fear he won't easily hand the position over to Shen Shushu, Le An argued. How do you know what the conclusion will be with Shen Shushu's trip up the mountain this time? If we accompany him, and the others mistake us for part of Shen Shushu's faction, won't we be dragging Shifu down? Yuan Chang hung his head and sighed. I just feel like we weren't very virtuous. Ultimately, Le An couldn't bear to see his Shirdi so disappointed. Why don't we secretly follow after them? That's good too. Meanwhile, Shen Qiao and Bian Mei were on their way up the mountain, and when the disciples on sentry duty saw him, they all had the same reaction as Le An and Yuan Chang, as if they'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. At first, they were tongue-tied, their expressions panicked, and most of them could only helplessly watch as the pair ascended the mountain, without daring to stop them. However, there were still a small number of people who came to block Shen Qiao's path. One such disciple said bluntly, "You outcast disciple of Shendu Mountain, how dare you barge your way into the mountain?" Shen Qiao recognized him. He was one of Elder Liu Yue's registered disciples. "Lo Liang, several years have already passed, and you're still here on sentry duty?" He spoke this sentence gently, as if it were a normal greeting. However, it managed to poke right into Luo Liang's sore spot, and his face immediately flushed red out of either shame or anger. You, Shen Qiao, you disrespectful madman! There's no place for you on Shendu Mountain anymore." Shen Qiao smiled slightly. "You're right. To rush up the mountain like this would appear a bit too rude. No matter what, we should have a guide to lead us there. I think you're quite suitable." So saying, he reached out and placed his hand on Lo Liang's shoulder. Lo Liang had clearly seen that it wasn't a fast movement, with no fancy tricks to it whatsoever. But all the same, he found himself unable to react in time and was seized. A piercing pain came from his shoulder, and he was unable to struggle free at all. His expression immediately transformed into one of terror. Ever since Shendu Mountain had reopened its gates, the arrival of news was no longer as delayed or obstructed as before. The disciples had caught wind of Shen Qiao's actions outside from time to time, but hearing about something couldn't compare to seeing it in person. Even if they'd heard 100 rumors about how powerful Shen Qiao had become, seeing it with their own eyes was something else. Lo Liang was no fool either. He immediately realized that he was a raft who delivered himself up and quickly conceded. "Shen Shushu, please spare me. This disciple is acting under orders to keep watch, to forbid anyone from going up the mountain. It wasn't to disrespect Shen Shushu." Shen Qiao's eyebrows rose a little, and he said, "Everyone is forbidden from going up the mountain? But what happened up on the mountain?" Lo Liang shared everything he knew, not daring to hide anything. "Yes, the elders are holding a conference on the mountain to discuss the candidates for the sect leader's position." "Have all the elders gathered?" "Only Elder Kong is in seclusion, so he is absent." The Elder Kong he spoke of was Le An and Yuan Chang's master. With their master this fearful, it was no wonder his disciples were the same. Bian Mei was watching dispassionately from the sidelines, but these scornful thoughts filled his heart. Meanwhile, Shen Qiao was thinking that the negative consequences resulting from Shendu Mountain's multiple generations of isolation were finally emerging one by one. With the sect's gates closed for so long, people's hearts had closed as well. If there were ambitious people like Yu, there would naturally also be those like Elder Kong who'd grown timid with the closure, believing that it was best to avoid trouble whenever possible and that the wise should play it safe. Perfect timing, said Shen Qiao. I should go up and listen myself. Lo Liang hurriedly said, I'll guide Shushu there. In fact, even if he didn't guide Shen Qiao, he had to. It was such a slender hand, fair as snow, yet it gripped his shoulder like a pair of iron pliers. Lo Liang was in terrible pain, but he didn't dare to show a hint of it. He quickened his pace and even judiciously explained the situation on the mountain to Shen Qiao. Seeing Lo Liang so wretched, the other disciples dared not come forward and block him. They all moved to either side of the road, letting Shen Qiao's party of 3 continue upward. It wasn't only because they'd been intimidated by Shen Qiao's martial prowess. Back then, when Shen Qiao had still been sect leader, he'd treated all the disciples incredibly well and been fair in meting out rewards and punishments in public, all while never putting on any airs in private. Many disciples admired and respected him deeply, but after the battle at Banbu Peak, Yu had joined with the sect's elders and forcibly taken over the position of leader, which caught everyone off guard. Though many disciples were too afraid to offend their seniors, it didn't stop them from having their own thoughts on the matter. Now, upon seeing Shen Qiao return, quite a few of their gazes even showed expressions of joy. Lo Liang took in those gazes and made his own judgment. He whispered to Shen Qiao, Shen Shushu, this disciple knows that you came back to seek justice. My Shifu has always been loyal to Xuandu Mountain. It was only because he was dissatisfied with Elder Tan's insistence on being acting sect leader, despite his mediocre abilities, that he opposed him so fiercely. If this disciple may be so bold, he asks your esteemed self to be gracious and show his Shifu magnanimity. Don't be too hard on him, please. Though this person was impudent and rash, he still had a bit of conscience. Shen Qiao smiled slightly. What if I wished to be hard on him? Lo Liang was at a loss for words. He'd been at Xuandu Mountain for so many years, yet remained a registered disciple. This was not only due to his aptitude being mediocre, it was also because his Shifu, Liu Yue, was someone who judged people based on their looks, rejecting all potential disciples who were too unattractive. As Lo Liang was only average in appearance, he naturally had no luck here. But because he was already a registered disciple under Liu Yue, he couldn't apprentice under any of the other elders. His level of dejection over this needed no elaboration. He thought to himself that, since he'd said those words, he could claim that he'd already done his best. After all, he couldn't control what Shen Shushu chose to do. With Lo Liang leading the way, Shen Qiao and Bian Yanmei met no further obstructions. Some disciples had only joined the sect after the battle at Banbu Peak, so they didn't recognize Shen Qiao. When they saw Lo Liang, they even greeted him and asked, Lo Shishong, didn't we have orders from above that unrelated persons are forbidden from going up the mountain? Lo Liang's expression was solemn. Who said he's an unrelated person? This is our sect's Shen Shushu. He has come back to attend the conference. Stunned by his bluff, the disciples let them pass without much trouble, which also saved Shen Qiao the trouble of taking action again. Considering this, Lo Liang was still quite useful. As they watched Lo Liang's group leave, the disciple who'd just blocked their way turned to his companion in confusion. I don't think we have a Shushu with the surname Shen. His companion racked his brains, then realization struck him. Surname Shen. Could it be Shen Qiao? An understanding dawned on both them. They instantly looked at each other in shock, but by now, Shen Qiao's group was already far away. There was no time to stop them. Shen Qiao and Lo Liang walked until they neared the entrance of the Sanqing Hall. As they approached, they heard a shout from inside. Tan Yuan Chun, before you temporarily took on the position of acting sect leader after sect leader Yu, we needed someone to take care of the sect's mundane affairs. That's why we had no objections. But the acting sect leader is different from an actual sect leader. You aren't the strongest martial artist in the sect, nor do you have any sort of reputation within the Jianghu. So why should you take the sect leader's position? Lo Liang looked embarrassed, for this voice belonged to his Shifu. Liu Yue. As today's discussion was an incredibly important one, everyone present was an elder of Xuandu Mountain. Hence, they didn't assign any disciples to keep watch outside the doors. The three of them approached, but no one noticed for now. In contrast to Liu Yue, the person who answered him used a much calmer tone, mild and steady. It didn't seem like he'd been angered. Elder Liu, if you have something to say, please say it properly. Aren't we all currently having a discussion? It's true that I'm untalented, and my aptitude is also the shallowest among the elders. But I understand that everyone recommended me not because I was the strongest, but because I've already been managing the general affairs year in and year out. So I'm more familiar with them. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who the leader is. What's important is that they can contribute to Xuandu Mountain. Don't you agree? Liu Yue sneered. So according to you, it doesn't matter whether the sect leader's strong as long as they're familiar with handling the sect's general affairs? Then what about my registered disciple Lo Liang, who deals with mundane affairs every day? Wouldn't he be even more suitable for the position? When he said this, not only did Lo Liang long to hide himself in shame, Shen Qiao also frowned slightly. Tan Shidi, one ought to have some self-awareness as a person, Liu Yue went on. Why did perfected Master Qi forgo making you, his eldest disciple, the sect leader, when by all rights you should have been? Why did he favor sect leader Shen instead? Wasn't it precisely due to your mediocre aptitude? If you're the only choice, I'd rather invite Shen Shidi back. I heard that Shen Shidi has made great martial advancements, that he's no longer how he was in the past. He's also served as sect leader before, so no matter the situation, he'd still be more suitable than you, right? Hearing this, Shen Qiao no longer remained silent and walked in. I'm deeply grateful for Elder Liu's favor. No one had expected Shen Qiao to silently appear outside, then silently walk inside as well. An eerie silence descended within the main hall. After a moment, Tan Yuanchuan stood up and welcomed him, an expression of surprised joy on his face. Arshidi, when did you return? Shen Qiao said, I ascended the mountain just now and heard that everyone was discussing the sect leader's position, so I came over. I trust that I didn't interrupt anything. Embarrassment washed over everyone's face. After Shen Qiao had fallen off the cliff, Yu Ai stole the position of sect leader. If one thought about it, he'd have no right to do so. However, he'd joined forces with the sect elders and forcefully taken over, and everyone found themselves unable to object. Of course, everyone had their own thoughts on the matter, but in truth, Shen Qiao was still a member of Xuandu's Violet Palace. With Yu Ai now missing and Shen Qiao's return, no one else was qualified to contend with him for the sect leader's seat. Not to mention, Qi Fengge's Shan He Tong Bei was still on his back. Liu Yue stole in before the others and reacted first. Since Shen Shidi has returned, all is well. Now that Yu Ai has vanished, Xuandu Mountain is without a leader, and we're hoping for someone to take the reins. Now that you're back, we finally found our pillar. Tan Yuanchuan also smiled. That's right, Ah Chao. Everything is well now that you've returned. Would you like to rest a bit before speaking? Shen Qiao met his concerned gaze and politely declined. Thank you very much, Da Shishong. We've already rested at the foot of the mountain. I heard that something happened to Yu Ai. Yes, Yu Shidi suddenly disappeared a few days ago. He was fine the previous night, but come the next day, he suddenly vanished without a trace. We searched the entirety of Xuandu Mountain, but he was nowhere to be found. He paused then, and his gaze slid to Bian Mei behind Shen Qiao. Who is this? Shen Qiao did not conceal any intention. This is the disciple of Huanyue sect leader Yan, Bian Mei Daoyou. As soon as this remark was made, all present looked at Bian Mei, who did not show any embarrassment or awkwardness, but instead allowed others to assess him in a grand manner. Tan Yuanchuan was first surprised, then deeply distressed. That day on the mountain, sect leader Yan took you away. Da Shishong was unable to stop him in time because he was too useless. But I didn't expect that you'd still be consorting with demonic practitioners. Shen Qiao remained calm. Shishong speaks too seriously. Shen Qiao can't bear the burden of the word consorting. Shishong saw with his own eyes that day. I was almost captured by Yu Ai, but sect leader Yan fortunately saved me. And yet you didn't come looking for me afterward? Tan Yuanchuan sighed slightly. Ah Qiao, don't be angry with your Dashishong. At that time, Xuandu Mountain was under Yu Ai's control. Where would I get the ability to mobilize disciples to look for you? Shen Qiao said calmly. If even Yuan Ying and Heng Bo could throw everything away in order to leave the mountain and look for me, I suppose I thought too highly of Da Shishong. Ah Qiao, I understand that you still have anger within you, Da Shishong. Shen Qiao interrupted him. Everyone knows you've always been a good person who's kind to anyone. That's why each and every one of us martial siblings loves you very much. But being a good person doesn't mean you should have no uncrossable lines when it comes to your principles. You were deceived by Yu Ai and were forced against your will. I don't blame you for this. But that day, I said that Yu Ai had poisoned me right in front of you. Even if you didn't believe me, shouldn't you have investigated it afterward? Yet, the one who didn't hear about it with their own ears, Yuan Ying and Heng Bo, believed me. The two of us have just reunited after a long separation, but instead of inquiring about this matter, you used Huanyue Sect to challenge my character and conduct. This really disappoints me. Tan Yuanchuan's expression finally shifted. What do you mean by this? At this moment, the disciples on sentry duty barged in while panicking, blood staining their clothes. Elders, this is bad. Huan Sect has stormed into the mountain, and there are also Gokturks. Well, everyone. We have finished the reading of chapters 115 through 118. These have been some really good chapters. I'm very intrigued to see how things get resolved at Xuandu Mountain. I don't really have anything to say other than I love Shen Qiao worrying over Yan Wusher's health and healing process. That was so cute. Also, page 95. I believe it was Lu'an who was judging what he thought Shen Qiao was going to do as far as possibly taking them up the mountain. And I love how it said that, yes, Lu'an had purely been judging his upright character through his own moral failings. And I just thought about that because a lot of times that is actually what we do in life. You know, when we encounter people and they do or say certain things, a lot of times we judge them either based on what we would do or based on what we have experienced others doing to us rather than judging from that person themselves, which of course I understand, you know, because we're human. But at the same time, I feel like it's something that we all definitely need to work on because sometimes instead of judging someone by their actual character, we judge them by how we see them, not by how they truly are. Other than that, I really don't have anything to say. So I will see you all in the next video. Have a good day or a good night and 我爱你们.